Okay, so let's go right into Module 2. Again, the title of this talk is Foods Enhanced Through Biotechnology. Are these products safe for consumers? I'm Dr. Charlie Santerre at Purdue University, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at our first module, and we'll pick up where we left off there. So let's talk about food allergy. This is a continuation of the food safety discussion that we started in the previous module. So let me introduce food allergy because it's really important in the discussion about genetically enhanced crops. A little background that will help get us started though. All true food allergies are caused by a protein. So why are we concerned about these? It's because when we genetically enhance a crop, we're adding DNA to it, or we're adding genes to it that will cause that crop to produce one or more additional proteins. So we want to know whether we've moved a protein into a crop that will cause people to have food allergies. A little more background to help us understand this topic. So about 2% of adults and 6 to 8% of children suffer from food allergies. Now you might ask, why do children have higher levels of food allergies? Is it because of these new crops? And no, that's not the case. Children lose many of their allergies after age 3. And they typically lose their allergies to cow's milk, eggs, and soybeans. So this is when the child's gut develops, their bellies develop to the point where these food allergens, these proteins, these peptides, don't make it across and cause an allergic reaction. Food allergies are a significant concern because they're estimated to cause about 29,000 emergency room visits with estimated 150 to 250 deaths per year. Importantly, about 90% of food allergies are caused by 8 foods: peanuts, soybeans, tree nuts, which would be your walnuts, your pecans, your almonds, milk, eggs, fish, crustacea. Your crustacea would be your shrimp, your crayfish, your lobster, and wheat. So these 8 foods, the big 8, cause most of our food allergies. I must also say, though, that we know that there's about 160 different foods that cause some type of allergic reaction in at least one individual. So from 1997 to 2007, food allergies increased by 18% in children younger than 18 years of age. And this is according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Scientists are still trying to figure out why we have an increase in food allergies, and it may be tied to asthma. 29% of children with food allergies also had asthma, compared to 12% of children who had food allergies and did not have asthma. So there's potentially a link between our increase in asthma and our increase in food allergies. This slide shows pretty much what happens in order to cause a food allergy in an individual. And I wanted to show you this slide. You have to look at the top half of the slide first because it's a 2-step process. First, an antigen, this would be your protein that can cause an allergic reaction, has to get into the body. So it has to pass a mucous membrane. It'll get in and it'll stimulate the beta lymphocytes to produce antibodies. And you can see these antibodies kind of look like broken ladders. And the broken ladders, the antibodies, will then have to find a receptor. The first part of this reaction is you have to be sensitized. You have to be exposed to an antigen, and it has to produce antibodies. So it's not a one-step process. So the next time you're exposed to this antigen is it has to get through the body, and then it will bind between 2 antibodies on the surface of something like a mast cell here in this diagram. And what happens when it makes that connection between the 2 broken ladders is the bottom will fall out of these mast cells. The bottom falling out means that all these mediators are released into our body. And these are things like histamine that cause inflammation. So if these histamines and other compounds that are released cause this massive inflammation in our body, it can lead to anaphylaxis, which can cause us to not be able to breathe and can be very serious in some individuals. So the point of this slide is that it's a 2-step process. First you have to be sensitized, and then you have potential for an allergic reaction. So let me kind of connect our discussion on food allergy back to genetically enhanced crops. So scientists a number of years ago said if we can add some better proteins from the Brazil nut, which has a higher content of methionine and sulfur amino acids, which are important for good health in humans, if we can take a gene from Brazil nuts and put it into soybeans, maybe we can make a better soybean. But what they found out is after they did this, they realized that individuals who were allergic to Brazil nuts were now allergic to the enhanced soybeans. And so they realized that this was not a good thing. They stopped development of this product, and it never made it into the marketplace. And it also helped us to understand how we need to better regulate these things so they don't go into the marketplace. So at this point, we've got a great track record. There have been no documented instances of a biotech crop in the marketplace causing a new food allergy. On the flip side of this, scientists are demonstrating that allergens can be reduced in peanuts, soybeans, rice, apple, tomato by using genetic enhancement. If we can turn off some of those genes that produce the proteins that cause food allergies, we can maybe reduce the number of people who are allergic to these crops. So this technology is a pretty exciting way for us to maybe get a handle on reducing food allergy. So now I want to totally turn and change direction and talk about consumer perception. And to do this, I'm going to talk about surveys that were conducted by the International Food Information Council. These specific numbers were published in 2010. So 28% of consumers were aware that biotech crops are currently in grocery stores. So very few of us know that these things are in the stores. I also note here that 60 to 80% of processed foods contain an ingredient from a biotech crop. So even though only a third of us know that they're there, we're pretty much, if you're eating processed foods, which almost all of us are, you've been eating biotech crops since the mid-90s. 77% of those surveyed would be somewhat likely or very likely to purchase produce that was modified by biotechnology if it was protected from insect damage and had fewer pesticides applied to it. So the public, when they're given a choice between biotech crops and insect damage or use of excessive pesticides, they're very appreciative of this new technology. 29% of those surveyed are somewhat favorable or very favorable towards animal biotechnology, while 27% are somewhat unfavorable or very unfavorable. The next challenge we have is that we're starting to see some biotech animals making it in front of the FDA for approval, and the public is probably not ready for those at this point, as demonstrated by only 29% being somewhat favorable or very favorable. 63% support the current FDA labeling policy, which states if the genetically enhanced crop is substantially equivalent to the conventional crop, there's no requirement for labeling. If it's different, then there's a labeling requirement. So let's talk about food labeling. If you walk up to a person on the street and ask them if biotech crops should be labeled, 90% will say yes, label them. But if you provide them with information that helps them understand the process better, many fewer of them ask for labeling. So remember that the FDA's policy, if a biotech food is not nutritionally different, a special label is not required. So here's my contention, or here's my opinion on this topic. I believe that if we required biotech crops to be labeled, it would be interpreted as a warning. Our biotech crops would start to look like a pack of cigarettes with the cancer warning. In addition, very importantly, food labels contain health information. A new label would dilute that important health information. And I'll get to that point here in the next slide. A GMO label would provide no specific information for consumers to make a decision. Remember that almost everything we're consuming that's processed has a GMO, a genetically modified organism ingredient in it. And I believe that labeling would cause food companies to back away from biotechnology as they have for irradiated foods. So we know that we can irradiate ground beef and prevent E. coli, which can kill young children. But in 1958, Congress required irradiation to be treated like a food additive. So if you irradiate a food, you have to put a logo and a label on the product that shows that it has been irradiated. Unfortunately, this has scared most food companies away from using this technology, which could save lives, because they were fearful that their customers would be scared by this new label. So let's take a brief look at a contemporary food label. And I usually, when I'm presenting this to students, I ask them, what's killing Americans? And most of our students get it right. Cardiovascular disease, cancer, these are the diseases that are killing Americans. So if you look at the food label, you can connect every nutrient listed on the label with some public health concern. Cardiovascular disease can connect to cholesterol, high blood pressure to sodium, colon cancer to dietary fiber, diverticulitis to dietary fiber, osteoporosis to calcium, vitamin D. Every part of the food label was intended to help consumers make a good decision about the foods they consume so they can be healthier. If we add any more information, we only dilute the important information. And adding a label that says a food has a genetically modified ingredient in there really doesn't tell the consumer what to do or which direction to go. So in my opinion, labeling at this point is not necessary. But if we look at some of the products from Europe, here I've got a couple labels that came out of Britain, and you can see that they encircled at the bottom in small print is produced from genetically modified soya. It's actually a pretty discreet label. This would not tend to make me scared to consume this product based on it looking like a pack of cigarettes. So the issue about food labeling, I think, is one that's most contentious, and everybody has their own opinion, and I encourage you to look into this issue and formulate your own opinion. Let's talk a little bit about organic foods and how they come into this whole discussion. So the Organic Foods Production Act was passed by Congress back in 1990. In 2001, when it was rolled out, the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, stated that organic foods aren't safer or more nutritious than conventional foods. That's an important point. I want to state it again because most consumers don't understand that organic foods inherently aren't safer or more nutritious than conventional foods. The standards for growing organic crops require that you not use chemical fertilizers, animal hormones, sewage sludge or biosolids, irradiation, genetically modified crops, or synthetic pesticides. They do allow certain pesticides to be used, like Bt, rotenone, pyrethrin, copper sulfate, and a few others. In 2010, U.S. organic sales were about 4% of all food sales. And here's the problem that many have with organic foods, is that they're a great selection if you find a high quality product. I would encourage you to purchase it and consume it, and I'm very embracing of organic crops for that reason. But it takes more energy and a greater carbon footprint to produce organic crops. So if all crops on the planet were produced organically, we would only be able to feed 5 of 7 of the world's inhabitants. So currently we have 7 billion people on the planet. We'd be able to feed 5 billion, we'd have to ask 2 billion to find another place to live. Here's the biggest concern about organic crops relative to this discussion. Organic crops will soon be inferior to biotech crops in regards to nutrient content and safety, unless the organic standards allow biotech crops to be included. Because we're able to modify these new crops and add nutrients and improve the nutritional quality of these products and improve the safety, organic crops will be left in the dust if they don't try to keep up. So let's talk about some of the exciting things that are happening relative to nutrients in biotech crops, what I call the future of biotechnology. To do this, I'd like to start talking about vitamin A. So vitamin A deficiency affects 180 to 250 million children, with 1 to 2 million deaths annually, according to the World Health Organization. In addition, iron deficiency affects about 30%, or 1.9 billion people, primarily women. Now I asked my students to look at this figure here and tell me if you were living in the brown countries where the vitamin A deficiency is the greatest, as opposed to the green countries where the vitamin A deficiency is non-existent, what crop do you think, if we could enhance, could help to alleviate some of the vitamin A deficiency in those countries? And pretty quickly they get it right: rice. So 2 scientists, Dr. Ingo Petrikis and Dr. Peter Beyer in Europe, developed what's called golden rice a number of years ago. Golden rice contains increased levels of beta-carotene, which can be converted to vitamin A in the body. It also has higher levels of iron. In the lower right, you can see what the grains of rice look like. They're actually yellowed because of the beta-carotene that's been added to them. And so many of the critics have looked at this and said, oh, the levels of carotene or vitamin A you get out of this rice are too low to be of any benefit. Well, let's talk a little bit about golden rice and see if there's going to be much benefit from this new crop. So the RDA, the recommended daily allowance for vitamin A, this is the amount that we'd like 1 to 3 year olds to get in their daily diet. So the RDA is 0.3 milligrams per day. Golden rice contains 1.6 to 2 micrograms per gram of beta-carotene. Now it's not 100% converted, so the conversion between beta-carotene and vitamin A is, it takes 4 to 15 molecules of beta-carotene to give you one retinol, one vitamin A molecule. So it's not 100% efficient. And you also have to assume the bioavailability, the amount we absorb in our gut, is somewhere between 50 and 100%. So if we use that, a child of 1 to 3 years of age would have to eat 1.3 to 10 pounds per day of dry rice to meet the RDA, the amount to help keep them healthy. And if we're trying to prevent deficiency, they'd have to consume 0.4 to 3 pounds per day. Well, you say that's just unreasonable. No child 1 to 3 years of age could eat 10 pounds of dry rice. But let's take this a little further. So Dr. Beyer, who helped to develop some of the numbers used here, believes that beta-carotene can be increased by 3 to 5-fold of what it is today. So there we've already got some benefits in how we can reduce it. So here's the point I'd like to make, that while golden rice may not be ready for the marketplace today, it's a proof of concept. Let's look at another proof of concept. So the first flight, and you can see this at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. And here's what the critics were probably saying about the first airplane. It doesn't seem worth the long security lines and the hassles with parking just for 12 seconds of flight. Besides, there isn't enough room for 2 carry-on bags. If man were meant to fly, you get the point I'm going. So it's a proof of concept. The golden rice was a great first step along a long process to get products into the market, into the bellies of those babies who need vitamin A, who will have a much greater chance of survival if they get the necessary amounts of vitamin A. It may not be there today, but it will be there in the future. This technology is pretty exciting and it will get us to where we want it to go. And so on this slide, we've kind of shown you some of the things that are in the pipeline for soybeans specifically. There are a number of crops, and what's going to start to happen is the first generation of crops are really to benefit the producer, make it more efficient, better yields, insect resistance, many things that are important for production. We're going to start to see the second generation of crops be more beneficial for consumers. So we're going to start to see customized crops that are really going to be demanded highly by consumers. High omega-3s, many other traits that we're going to start to see coming out in our crops. So that'll be the next generation. I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about the transgenic salmon that's being reviewed by Food and Drug Administration right now and give a little bit of background on it. So the company who's developed this is AquaBounty. So they started with an Atlantic salmon. So this is the typical salmon that you would farm and see in the grocery stores. They added a gene from a Chinook salmon. They made sure that all of the modified salmon are triploid, which makes them sterile so that they couldn't reproduce if they ever got into a natural environment. And what they found is that the feed conversion is improved by 10%, which means what? So here on the right you can see the conventional salmon versus the AquaBounty transgenic salmon. They get to the same size, but the AquaBounty salmon gets there in half the time. It's much more efficient at converting its feed into growth, and therefore it makes it highly desirable. The salmon, for all intents and purposes, is exactly the same as a conventional salmon. It just grows a lot faster and doesn't get any bigger. And so what AquaBounty is proposing, if FDA approves this, is that it would be produced in a hatchery in a closed containment and also on land in total closed containment, so there's no chance for the salmon to ever get out into the wild. It's a pretty exciting demonstration that we can improve the efficiency of things like fish production. Well, let's go through some of the benefits of biotechnology. Over time, we're going to see increased total yields, reduced pest damage, reduced weed competition, reduced or eliminated viral infestations, increased yield in general, improved nutrient content, reduced allergens, pesticides, mycotoxins, and natural toxicants in our foods. We're going to see extended shelf life like we demonstrated in the Flavor Saver tomato. We're going to see improved flavor and quality, we're going to start to see extended growing season, further reduced costs in our crops, and reduced environmental impact from agriculture. Every one of these attributes are desirable, and it's a pretty exciting future for this technology. So that concludes our second module. I hope I've shown benefits that we can receive from biotechnology, and I welcome you to look into the literature and explore this topic a little bit more. Thank you very much.